This series has explained the long-term American plan to seize control of Europe by absorbing all nations into NATO. This was very successful after the Cold War ended, but taking control of Russia and its sister nation of Ukraine is complex. A 2014 coup in Ukraine allowed the American CIA to take control of most of Ukraine. Russia responded to the coup by accepting a plea from the Ukrainian province of Crimea to re-annex that Russian-speaking region. It also supported an armed rebellion by Russians in Ukraine's Donbass region that led to a military stalemate. A European agreement, called the Minsk Accords, was supposed to stop the fighting and allow peace. Destroying Russia remains a long-term American goal, but the Neocon priority was to finish the destruction of Syria. The Neocons' Greater Israel project is mostly unknown to Americans. See the short video link below, Conquering the Middle East. Part of this sinister plan was an effort to destroy Syria, beginning in 2011. Israel and Turkey sought to expand their borders, while the Arab Gulf states wanted a secure pipeline to send natural gas to Europe. Neocons control American foreign policy, so the United States supported this effort that shipped tons of arms and thousands of jihadist mercenaries to Syria to overthrow its popular government. Once Syria was destroyed, it would be easy to conquer Lebanon. The resulting turmoil would lead to a peace agreement that would provide Israel with a huge security zone over much of southern Syria that would be gradually absorbed into Israel, as was done with Syria's Golan Heights. Turkey would annex large portions of northern Syria that it had lost after World War I. Russia did nothing as NATO bombed Serbia in 1999 and destroyed Libya in 2011. It watched NATO ignore promises not to expand eastward and not to build new military bases in Europe. After the CIA coup in Ukraine in 2014, Russia realized that it must push back to survive. Russia had always maintained friendly relations with Syria and sold it much weaponry. By the end of 2015, the Syrian government had lost control of most of its territory. However, the Syrian army proved tough and a stalemate developed. It was thought that a huge American bombing campaign could turn the tide, but the American public and Congress were not ready for another war, despite a major lobbying effort from AIPAC. The weapons of mass destruction threat was spun, but Syria diffused it by agreeing to allow American contractors to destroy its chemical stockpiles. Yet even after this, the gassed his own people ruse was tried twice. This failed to generate support for American airstrikes. Russia had not objected when Libya was destroyed, but decided to intervene to save Syria. It vetoed the effort to establish a UN-sanctioned no-fly zone over Syria, knowing this was just an excuse for a massive bombing campaign, like was just done in Libya. Starting in December 2015, a few thousand Russian troops and dozens of aircraft arrived in Syria. Russia announced that any aircraft that bombed Syrian forces would be shot down. Syria had formally requested United Nations member assistance to repel foreign aggression, and Russia and Iran responded as required by the UN Charter. This was a big surprise and resulted in a rapid reversal on the battlefield. The Russians infuriated Turkey by bombing rebel oil tankers that were openly hauling stolen Iraqi and Syrian oil to Turkey. So a Turkish general ordered the shoot-down of a Russian fighter that had crossed their border for just a few seconds while turning. Turkey and much of Europe rely on oil and natural gas pipelines that flow through Turkey. The Russians let Turkey know that their Syrian conquest would not be allowed, and any further provocations could result in the destruction of these pipelines. Turkey told its allies that their secret partition plan had become a bloody mess that caused over 3 million refugees to flood Turkey, and it was not worth risking war with Russia. This displeased its allies, so they attempted a military coup in Turkey. This failed when the Russians learned of the plan and tipped off the Turkish president. See the short video link below, the Empire's 2016 coup in Turkey. Russia also had an economic reason to intervene. It was supplying Europe with 30% of its natural gas needs. Europe wanted an alternative, and a pipeline to the vast natural gas fields in the Middle East was the solution. The nation of Qatar proposed spending $10 billion for a pipeline, but Syria chose to support a proposed pipeline from its ally Iran, which was unlikely to be built due to American control of Iraq. Russian intervention to save Syria led to a huge power shift in the Middle East. The failed Neocon coup in Turkey, years of threats to Iran, and threats to Russia led to an informal alliance. These nations had differences in the past, but clear threats from the Israeli-American-Saudi axis of evil encouraged them to form an unofficial alliance. As a result, the Neocon plan for Greater Israel was halted, so the Neocons accelerated an ambitious plan to destroy Russia to allow the Greater Israel plan to proceed. Economic sanctions were imposed on Russia for any reason. Treaties were ignored while billions of American tax dollars were devoted to expanding the Ukrainian army and bolstering NATO forces along Russia's borders. Israeli support for this effort was muted. It had always maintained good relations with the world's nuclear powers as a matter of survival. As the Soviet Union disbanded, a huge effort was made to help all Jews immigrate to Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is shown here in 2017, meeting with Israeli-Russian Red Army veterans in Jerusalem. As of 2022, Russian speakers number around 1,300,000 people, or 15% of the Israeli population. Most speak Russian at home, read Russian newspapers, and remain proud of Russia. This deters Israeli leaders from supporting actions against Russia, as it awkwardly maintains good relations while continuing efforts to destroy Syria with weekly bombing attacks. The primary Neocon strategy to weaken and topple Russia's government was to ignite a war between Russia and Ukraine. A few minutes of internet research shows anyone this would prove disastrous for Ukraine. Russia has 4 times the population of Ukraine and 10 times its economic power. Its military is larger and far more advanced. Russian President Vladimir Putin had publicly said he would not allow Ukraine to join NATO or allow foreign military bases in Ukraine. NATO members respected Putin's view and refused to support American plans to absorb Ukraine into NATO after clear warnings by foreign policy experts. John Mearsheimer is a professor at the University of Chicago, famous for speaking the truth, even when it challenges the goals of the American government. Shortly after the 2014 CIA coup in Ukraine, he gave a speech and sounded the alarm that the plan to ignite a war between Russia and Ukraine would destroy Ukraine. His entire speech is linked below and has 28 million views on YouTube. Here is Professor Mearsheimer's conclusion from way back in 2015.
But I actually think that what's going on here is that the West is leading Ukraine down the primrose path. And the end result is that Ukraine is going to get wrecked. And I believe that the policy that I'm advocating, which is neutralizing Ukraine and then building it up economically and getting it out of the competition between Russia on one side and NATO on the other side, is the best thing that could happen to the Ukrainians. What we're doing is encouraging the Ukrainians to play tough with the Russians. We're encouraging the Ukrainians to think that they will ultimately become part of the West, because we will ultimately defeat Putin and we will ultimately get our way. Time is on our side. And of course, the Ukrainians are playing along with this. And the Ukrainians are almost completely unwilling to compromise with the Russians and instead want to pursue a hardline policy. Well, as I said to you before, if they do that, the end result is that their country is going to be wrecked. And what we're doing is, in effect, encouraging that outcome. I think it would make much more sense for us to work to create a neutral Ukraine. It would be in our interest to bury this crisis as quickly as possible. It certainly would be in Russia's interest to do so. And most importantly, it would be in Ukraine's interest to put an end to the crisis. Thank you.